It's now time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. Well, many are expecting a recession to hit the US economy, which could certainly mean a ripple effect for economies all around the world.
That's right. So how bad is the situation in the US, and is there any chance the world's biggest economy can avoid the worst? Well, to get a look at the U.S. economy right now, we turn to Renee Bowen, professor of economics at the University of California, San Diego School of Global Policy and Strategy. Good morning to you, Professor.
Good morning. How are you?
We're doing okay. Well, I'm hoping the U.S. economy is also doing well as well. But there are some pessimists as well. A number of economists certainly predicting a recession to hit the U.S. What are your thoughts on this, and how likely is a recession there?
Right. So, the typical definition of a recession is 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. And in the last release from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, we saw that there was a downturn in GDP, so negative growth in GDP. So the question is, will we continue to see that negative growth in GDP? And obviously, it's going to depend on a number of factors. It's going to depend on what the Fed decides to do about interest rates going forward. It also depends on what the administration decides to do about spending. But then there are other factors sort of beyond their control, including supply and demand shifters, including what's happening in the Ukraine and Russia, and what happens to supply chains and trade in general.
And Professor Bowen, the last time the US slipped into recession was in December of 2007, which lasted until June 2009. And well, how does the build-up to that recession really compare with the situation that the US is seeing right now?
Right. So there isn't a whole lot that can be compared to the current situation. We are coming out of the COVID dip, if you would. Many economists thought that there may have been a more prolonged recession going into COVID and coming out of COVID. We didn't see that happen. We saw a very strong recovery coming out of COVID. The challenge is that the recovery was very uneven. So we saw top income groups experiencing a rebound in income and recovery of income to pre and above pre-COVID levels. But at the bottom end of the income distribution, we're seeing a downturn that's persisting. So this sort of bifurcated recovery is quite unlike what we saw in 2007. The growth in the economy just after COVID really defied expectations, and it was largely because of that bifurcated economy. And so we have to keep an eye on that going forward.
Professor, we do have some optimists who believe that the U.S. could actually avoid a recession, which would be fantastic. But what factors would actually allow for that to happen?
So the growth that has been driving the recent upturn in GDP is really driven by fundamentals. There have been improvements in technology. There have been a strong growth in demand for autos. And that's, again, being driven by strong growth in incomes at the upper end of the income distribution. And that's likely to continue. So the challenge is how to maintain that strong growth in income without jeopardizing investments too much. So the Fed has, of course, raised interest rates more than it had intended to, 75 basis points, but it will have to signal more certainty about what it's going to do in the future. The name of the game right now is certainty and stability. So as long as the Fed can create that certainty and stability for markets, they know how to perform. But if it seems that the Fed and the administration really is starting to lose control to some extent of the economy, that's when markets will really get worried, and we're likely to see a deeper recession.
Well, one of the biggest factors leading to the huge slowdown in economic growth for the US is the massive inflation that the country is seeing right now. And with the US Fed having increased its benchmark key rates by 75 basis points and there being even more rate hikes ahead. Do you think it's going to be enough to quell the inflation? And if so, how much longer do you think we'll have to wait until we see the effects of that?
Right. So that's clearly going to cool down the economy to some extent. The drivers of inflation lately have been housing prices as well as food prices. And food prices clearly due to what's happening with Russia and the Ukraine. And that is not likely to abate very soon. Although what's the good news there is that governments are very much aware of it. And even the World Trade Organization is taking note. And there are attempts to coordinate on food supplies to help mitigate whatever price increases are being driven by the situation in Ukraine and Russia. The other part of it is housing prices, and the increase in interest rates are going to have a major effect on housing prices, and we've already seen this. So that part of inflation is likely to come down. But again, the thing to watch is this economy where at the top, incomes are still strong and can drive higher prices, even though at the bottom, you're going to see a slowdown in spending.
Certainly very similar to the situation that we're seeing here in South Korea. But Professor, again, thank you very much for your insights today, and really looking forward to speaking to you again in the future.